Good morning, children. Welcome back to the English class. Today we are going to continue discussing our poem Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening. Do you remember what we did in the last video? Yes, we read the poem and discussed the meanings as well as the deeper meaning of some lines. Now, a quick recap of the poem. One winter evening, the poet is crossing deep, dark woods and he stops in the middle of the woods to admire and explore the natural beauty all around. The owner of the woods is not present there. It is snowing, there is heavy snowfall, and it is looking beautiful. He wants to stay on and go on admiring the beauty all around. And this the horse finds very strange because there was no farmhouse nearby, no one around, and then also his master had stopped. And so the horse shook the harness bells to ask whether he had made a mistake. Now, in addition to the sound of the harness bells, there were two more sounds. Do you remember the other two sounds? Yes, the sound of easy wind and downy flakes. Of course, there was a wind which was blowing and the flakes were falling down, light flakes, snowflakes were falling, and so there was a soft sound. And then the poet ends the poem with some lines, and these lines are very, very important. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. As I told you, there is a literal meaning which is very easy. He wants to stay on, but he has some things, some commitments to fulfill. And so he says that he has to go on traveling miles and miles before he can rest. And what is the deeper meaning? The deeper meaning is that the life may seem beautiful and you may want to stay at one place, but then you have a lot to achieve, and this all must be done by you before you die. So there are a lot of things you have to achieve in your life before you die. Isn't it very easy? A poem of just four stanzas of 4 lines each, a short poem, just 16 lines. Now we come to the exercises on the next page. The summary of the poem, that is exercise A1, we have already done. So now we go to A2 and we are going to do exercise A2. Choose the correct answer. There are options. One option is right. The other two are wrong. But sometimes you may have two correct options. So you should read all the options and then decide which one or which ones are correct. Now the first one is the phrase promises to keep means. He has used the phrase promises to keep. What is the meaning of this phrase? I'll read the options for you and you decide which one is the correct one. And I'm sure most of all, it is very easy of all the questions. This one you will be able to answer. A. Many commitments to fulfill. B. Many promises to make. C. Many choices to make. He doesn't have to make promises now. The promises are already made. And so this one is wrong, B. Then C also, he doesn't have to make choices. What he has to do is he has to fulfill the promises he has already made. So the first one is correct. Many commitments to fulfill. That is option A. Have you all ticked it in your books? Now we come to number 2. In the last stanza, the word sleep metaphor means what is used to compare qualities of two things. Similes have the word like or as. Metaphors do not have like or as, but then one thing is compared to another thing. A. To dream. B. To die. C. To take a short nap. Now the word sleep used in the poem is used for death. That means to die. It is not used for to dream or for a short nap. So option B is the correct one. Now third one, which is true? There are 3 sentences. One is true, the other 2 are false. Let us read the sentences. The poet does not know the owner of the words. B. The poet is not sure if he knows the owner of the words. C. The poet is quite sure who the owner of the words is. In the beginning of the poem, the poet says that I think I know the owner of the words. Who is the owner of the words? He has a house in the village and he's there. He's not there in the woods, but away in his house in the woods. So which one do you think is the correct one? All 3 look correct, but the third one is the correct option. The poet is quite sure who the owner of the woods is. Does not know is not correct because he knew where the owner was and he knew that he had a house in the village and he was quite sure. So options A and B are wrong and C is the correct one. Now we come to the next exercise, which is exercise B, appreciation. Appreciation is when you see and read and praise something done by someone. Now here you have to appreciate Robert Frost for some phrases which he has used in the poem. Now Robert Frost has used these phrases to create a sensory effect in the poem. Now what is sensory effect is? It affects your senses. All of you know we have 5 senses and they are very, very important. Without these senses, we would not be able to enjoy life. So now which phrases create a sensory effect in the poem? Some of these make a visual impact, while some others make an auditory impact on the reader. Now we have to concentrate on only 2 senses, that is vision and hearing. Some of the phrases which are used by Robert Frost, they create a visual impact. That means you see what he is describing. And then there are phrases which create an auditory impact. That means you are supposed to hear what that phrase has described. So you have to use your hearing or your ears, and when it is something which makes a visual impact, you have to imagine as if you are looking at it. Sorry. Now they have already taken some phrases from the poem and given to you, which are there used by Robert Frost to create a sensory effect. Now let us look at the phrases. Frozen lake. Second one, there are two phrases together. Easy wind and downy flake. Third one, fill up with snow. Fourth, darkest evening. Fifth one, harness bells a shake. Sixth one, lovely. And the seventh one, dark and deep. Now all these phrases, and the second one is two phrases together. You have to look at these and you have to decide whether we are supposed to see them in our mind or to hear them. And if you are able to see, visualize them in your mind, that means it has a visual impact. And if you are able to hear, then it has an auditory impact. On page number 65, you have two columns. First one is visual impact, the second one auditory impact, and these phrases you have to put in one of these columns. Now when you have a frozen lake, can you see it or hear it? Of course, you will know if a lake is frozen by looking at it. So which impact it has? It has visual impact. And in which column are you going to put it? In the first one, that is visual impact. Now we go to the second one. Easy wind and downy flake. Now easy wind is the soft blowing wind, and downy flakes are also creating a sound by falling down lightly. And he has very clearly said that these were the two other sounds which you could hear in addition to the sound of the harness bells. So where are you going to put it? Because you are supposed to hear these sounds. Auditory impact. So in the second column. Now fill up with snow. When you have snowfall, the snow is falling down. You are supposed to look at it and know. Of course, it may have a very, very soft sound. But then when you see something filling up, that means you have to look at it and see that place being filled with snow. So in the first column, that is visual impact. Now the fourth one, darkest evening. Something is bright or dark or darkest. You know by looking at it, by looking at the light or unavailability of light. So again, you have to use your eyes or vision. So it has visual impact. Now harness bells a shake. This, of course, when the bells shake, they make a sound and it has an auditory impact. Lovely, you may have a lovely dress, lovely natural scene, lovely face, lovely card. All have to be looked at. to know whether it is lovely or the opposite. So what are you going to use? Your vision or eyes, and it has to come in the first column. Dark and deep again. I told you when we were doing darkest evening, you have to use your eyes and look at something to know whether it's dark or light or bright. So in the first column. Now let us look at the answers. In the visual impact column, you have to write frozen lake, fill up with snow, darkest evening, lovely, and the last one is dark and deep. In auditory impact, which you have to hear or listen to, easy wind and downy flake, and the second one is harness bells a shake. In fact, he has described three sounds. Harness bells a shake, make a sound when he shakes the harness bell, the horse shakes the harness bell, and the other two sounds are of the easy wind and flakes, soft, light flakes or snowflakes. Have you all got the answers? It has to be written down in the columns on page 65 with a pencil. Please do not use pen in the textbook. Now the second thing we have to do in appreciation, of course it has number 1, but it is the second thing after the table, that is right below the table. Give 2 examples of alliteration from the poem. We have done alliteration before, and I hope you remember what is alliteration. I discussed it yesterday when we were discussing the poem. I told you to pay attention to the poetic devices used by the poet. Some of these are alliteration, metaphors, personification, repetition, etc. So now the poet wants you to pay attention to the sound of words. That's why he has used alliteration. Now what is alliteration? Alliteration is when the same sound is repeated more than once in the same line or in the single line. Now you please go back to the poem, page 63, and underline a line where you think the same sound is repeated. These are not the only 2 lines. An example, I have taken 2 lines from the poem. There can be more. So you please go through the poem very, very attentively and carefully and slowly and underline the lines which have 2 or more words with the same sound. But the 2 examples I have taken are the woods are lovely, dark and deep. That is the first line of the last stanza. And which sound is repeated here? The D sound, dark and deep. D for dark starts with D sound and D for deep. So the woods are lovely, dark and deep. You will have to write the whole line. Now the second one is the only other sounds, the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. Of course, there is no alliteration in the last line. So we just take the third line of the third stanza. The only other sounds, the sweep. Sir sound is repeated. Sound and sweep have the sir sound. Now some children may think only other also could be an alliteration because both start with O, but then only other have different sounds. Only has the O sound and other has the sound. So we cannot take O sound as alliteration here. Only sounds the sweep, sir sound is there, so it is alliteration. Now you please, all of you, go through the poem once again, and if you think there are some more alliteration, underline those and write alliteration or just AL, or maybe just A if you have no space for alliteration. Now the third thing you have to do in appreciation, which is of course question 2, is explain the meaning of the line and miles to go before I sleep. Now this the poet has repeated twice, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. It is repeated twice. These are the last two lines of the poem, and these sum up the philosophy of the poet or the deeper meaning of the poem. So let us see what it means. And miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. The simple meaning, the literal meaning is that the poet has to travel a lot to fulfill all his commitments, to keep all his promises before he can think of sleeping and resting. That is the literal meaning. But what is the deeper meaning? We have to think and write about the deeper meaning as well. Now, the repetition of the last line emphasizes the poet's deep sense of responsibility towards his commitments. Now, if you can't understand any of these words, please write using simpler words. The repetition of the last line emphasizes means it tells us about the poet's deep sense of responsibility towards his commitments. Now, if you think it's very, very difficult, please simplify all the words, and you could write that the repetition of the last line, even if repetition is difficult, you can just write the poet repeats the last line because it is the line which emphasizes or focuses on the fact that he must keep his commitments, fulfill all his commitments, keep his word, and do what he has promised. He wishes to watch the beauty of nature, but he has much to do before he can finally rest. Now he wishes, he wants to stay on in the middle of the lovely deep dark woods or forest and to watch the beauty of nature and explore the forests. But he has much to do before he can finally rest. But then he decides not to stay back and to continue with his journey because he has much to do before he can finally find a place to rest. Now, this was the simpler literal meaning. What is the deeper meaning? What does it mean metaphorically? Metaphorically, it means that however beautiful life in the world might be, we must fulfill our responsibilities before we die. Now, the deeper meaning is that life seems beautiful, and however beautiful life in the world might be, You cannot stop traveling and stay there forever. Of course, you can halt or stop for a little while and then proceed. So, metaphorically, or its deeper meaning is that however beautiful life in the world might be, we must fulfill our responsibilities before we die. That means all the promises which we have made must be kept, all the responsibilities must be fulfilled before we die. And this poem he ends on a philosophical note. Thank you, children. Please do the homework. I have put the prep in the ERP app. Please look at the homework and complete it by tomorrow till we meet again with another interesting class on the same poem. Thank you, children. See you.